everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, we've got Stefan in the studio with us. Stefan is one of our long-standing team members. He's been with the Storm Riders for over 6-7 years, something like that.
7 years now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yep.
We picked him up and carried him off.
Yeah, that's right.
Almost quite literally.
Stefan does a lot of his own tech work. He has for a very long time. And he's recently, from our perspective, has recently moved into the world of HPA airsoft guns.
It's not recent from his perspective because of the number of hours he's put in.
Yeah, and I know he's going to talk a little bit about that. I just want to give you a bit of an intro. He has two airsoft guns that he's running right now. One is like a 416 compact, and the other one is a sniper rifle. And so last weekend, I actually got the chance to use his 416 compact. I'll let him talk about the specifics of it. But it was a really interesting experience for me because I come from many years ago playing paintball with a paintball marker and a remote line and all this kind of stuff. And that was a world that I left behind to come play airsoft. And I didn't think that I would be really interested in going back that route. But it just so happened that when we played the game on Saturday, I should say, Steph was sitting out for a game, and I was like, hey, can I use your HPA just for fun? And I got a chance to use it. And it was a really cool experience that I wouldn't have been exposed to before. So I thought it would be interesting to have a podcast discussion with Stefan about how, you progressed from your AEGs, your typical airsoft guns, into the world of HPA. What is available right now in terms of HPA, and what route did you decide to go with your setup? And some of the key differences that you've seen both in terms of, how it works on a field and also in terms of playstyle and stuff like that. So I think maybe first of all, let's start with sort of the basics. So like, how long have you been tinkering with HPA guns in airsoft?
Tinkering probably only in the last couple of months, but my interest has really started way back when I first got into airsoft. Obviously, like everybody, I started watching videos, and I got a couple of guys that I liked, and I started seeing these like weird kind of hybrid paintball airsoft guns. Like, what's this little line you got? How come it doesn't make this big bang noise like an airsoft gun like I'm used to a Gearbox making? And got into it a little bit more, and it's like, well, it's not gas blowback. This is actually HPA, or high pressure air. So like, well, first, sir, you had my curiosity, and now you have my interest.
Right.
There are a bunch of issues that it avoids that are definitely appealing.
Yeah.
I definitely can see the appeal of running one in an LMG.
LMGs, snipers.
So what appealed to you in particular, Steph, about like HPA versus, like our traditional blowback guns, just for people listening, run off propane, right? Or sometimes called green gas. I mean, you can run them off duster and a bunch of different other stuff too, but generally it's propane versus high pressure air. So what was the appeal, I guess, for you looking at HPA going like, oh, this isn't propane, or this isn't like gas blowback?
Well, at the time I hadn't really got into gas blowback like rifles. I was more interested in, like, I collected a couple of pistols, but they were more for show. I didn't really care about using them in game. Mm-hmm. And I think Pat touched on this in a last podcast or a couple of podcasts ago about it's such an inefficient system, but it's designed to be inefficient, so it works the way it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's built to be very cool, but it's not built to work as such.
It's not supposed to be like a traditional gas blowback pistol with a racketing slide is going to be way less efficient on gas than like a locked slide, because It's not using that dump gas. But back to HPA, one, it's not as messy, and anyone who's worked on a gearbox, anyone who's looked inside a gearbox, Phil, Pat, especially Pat, will know that sometimes you take them apart and they come apart real easy. And then sometimes you take them apart and you're looking for screws and springs for couple of weeks afterwards and going, there's that anti-reversal latch spring I was looking for.
Right.
Yeah, I recently found a spring for a gun that was just like, you're on my foot.
So now that like I've moved into the HPA, it's a lot cleaner system. I mean, the Kythera is what I run personally, and it's dropping to a point, like a lot of these systems are, but everything is contained. So it's a cylinder that I put in my gun, and it has a little trigger mechanism on the end, and that's it. There's no little springs. There's no little screws. I don't have to worry about keeping all my shims in place while I push a 120 spring into a piston and try to keep that all down and hope to bejesus that nothing shoots out of it just before I click it into place. And, oh, how come that's not going into place? Oh, the trigger's not in place properly. You know what I mean?
I definitely, if I got into HPA, I'm not sure that I'd miss the bits flying everywhere, but I feel like I would miss the satisfaction. Closing up a gun and having it all go together really nice is a really positive feeling. That being said, like HPA setups, I think you're looking at also a lot less parts that can fail. Like you're looking at O-rings, really?
Realistically, yeah. A lot of systems, it's a solenoid. So the only part that's moving is the actual gate on the solenoid to open, close, open, close. That's it. Everything else is just O-rings and making sure that all that pressure is held to where it has to be and where it has to go.
And so coming back to HPA versus like green gas, for instance, just for a moment, I guess you avoid a lot of the other pitfalls that happen by using like a gas blowback system. So obviously you already mentioned the inefficiency of the system, forcing the gas back to, rack the slide or whatever. But also the fact that if you're using green gas and it's like 7 degrees Celsius outside or lower, you're losing efficiency from your gas. Is that something that you avoid with HPA?
Right now, in my own experiments with it, obviously it's not been that cold in Newfoundland yet.
Right.
I have read certain things from people down in the States, other places in the world, where it's not as noticeable compared to green gas, but obviously you're going to have a little bit of loss, I guess, just because it's so cold, and it's probably crushing down your tank a little bit. Not crushing, but it's kind of making your tank contracted if you're running that type of tank. I personally run an aluminum tank right now. I don't really want to spend $300 or $400 on a carbon fiber tank.
Yeah, for sure.
After spending what I've spent on what I have, I was like, I'm going to save just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I know Cal, who runs a HPA setup,
yes,
has run his in pretty cold weather without any real ill effect. I feel like from my own reading, the loss is mostly going to be you're going to lose some efficiency. Like the system should still function pretty much around the same. You're going to need to refill your tank more often.
Yeah, it's going to be obviously it's going to make your O-rings contract a little bit more. So there's probably going to be a little bit of seepage. And Cal's Tippmann is different from anything I run. Again, I'm not quite sure exactly how the Tippmann system works. There's probably going to be a lot of people in the comments or will tell me, and I might actually do a bit of research after this to figure it out.
And I'd love to know the answer, and we'll probably we could go look at YouTube when we're done too.
Yeah, I think, but the Tippmann is more in line with the traditional gas blowback system, in my understanding of it right now. And there are two different ways to run the Tippmann. You can run it with the CO2 proprietary mags that it comes with, so it's a 12 gram in the magazine, and then you make your shots, and then whatever else it gets vented when you drop your mag. But Cal has it run with the remote line, and that's more in line with what I run, as opposed to the Tippmann is just they took a green gas gun and an HPA gun and they went, let's throw them together and have a little flipper baby here and see what happens.
Let's make a thing.
Yeah, and it's very akin to a paintball gun in many respects too. It's very loud. Compared to one of the things that struck me about your Kythera is that it's very quiet, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But I know Cal's Tippmann, thinking about back in my day when I was playing paintball a millennia ago, that's the kind of sounds that my paintball gun would make, right? Very, very similar. And I ran a remote line, same sort of deal. Had the tank in my back pouch and all this kind of stuff, right? And same sort of you got a really loud report from the muzzle, from the gun. Yep. Compared to other HPA setups like the ones that you're running now. Yeah,
I'd be really shocked, if I'm honest, to find that it wasn't at least some parts cross compatibility between the Tippmann paintball guns and the Tippmann Airsoft gun that Cal's running.
Well, and I mean, it's ancient too, in terms of airsoft technology. The Tippmann M4 came about 10 years ago?
No,
Something like that?
Not that long. It's probably been 5, maybe 4 or 5 years. Because I know Cal's been running his for about 4.5, 5 years.
Right. Okay. Well, regardless, I think, it's not the latest available HPA technology, right?
No.
So,
and even what I'm running is not technically, I mean, I got a Polar Star, it was Kythera, and I also run a Wolverine bolt system for my sniper rifle. And like those companies, like Polar Star has been out as long as I've been in the airsoft game. Mm-hmm. And Wolverine has been out just as long. I think they came out a little bit afterwards, but I mean, I like their stuff.
So let's talk about that a little bit then. So back when we started playing together, and since I would say up until the last like 6 months, really you'd been like essentially exclusively, let's say, an AEG guy. Yeah. Right, like you had a bolt action sniper that you used every now and then, obviously like a pistol, sidearm, or whatever. But primarily when we played, it was an AG. So what exactly? It's not what snapped in your brain, but like what exactly was the impetus for you to start looking at HPA more seriously now? Like why now? I guess.
At this point in my life, I've kind of gotten to the point where I have a lot of guns, and I don't think I want to buy any more just yet. I want to start playing with what I have. And I guess this kick in the ass for the Kythera was we had the Discord going, and there was a couple of guys on there that were running HPA. Todd was running it. Chaz runs one. And I've always wanted to get into HPA, like fully convert an AEG or even buy an HPA standard gun, although I don't think you can get many of them anymore. And it was just, you know what? I'm going to do it. Just going to dive head first into it. So I had some money saved up that was going to be, well, is this going to be for gear? Is it going to be for a gun? This is my money
in the Airsoft account.
And so I just decided to jump into it. And like I said, I had the bolt system before, and I've had that for a couple of years, but that was kind of a project, a long running project. I was away at the time when I bought it, so it was like 3 or 4 months before I even took it out of the packaging. Mm-hmm. From the time I bought it. And then I put it in the gun, and then by then I had to go back to work. So it was another 5-6 months before I played with it again. And then it was like, well, it's winter and I'm not shagging around with it. So it kind of went into the back burner. And like you said, I was running this AEG, and the huge kick in the ass was I put a Spectre MOSFET in it. And not to poo-poo the Spectre FET, like I ran one, everyone on the team usually runs one, like you have one, Pat has one. Chris, I believe, has one as well.
Yep.
They were good. And when I installed it, it was great. And then I started to run into, well, I'm having like battery issues. I had a couple of batteries like puff up on me, like Bose puff up. And I don't like the idea of my really expensive airsoft gun literally going up in flames in my hand. So
understandably.
I kind of put it back there. It was like that HPA idea came up again, and most HPA systems still run a battery. They have to run a FCU or fire control unit, so the brain of the gun kind of controls the solenoid to let it open and close. I mean, just because
you're a small lipo there, though, right?
Oh yeah, it's like no bigger than a piece of hubba bubba gum. 250 milliamps. I got one in my my little kit there. Yeah, it's tiny.
Okay.
And that's literally to open and close the solenoid, because it just doesn't. It's a mechanical or electromechanical thing, so it needs that little charge. But with those FCUs, you can also control like the dwell on your nozzle. You can control your rate of fire. So if you want to have a burst of 10 rounds, well, now it's a burst of 10 rounds. If you want to have controlled 900 rounds a minute, well, there you go. It's 900 rounds a minute.
Gotcha.
Right?
This conversation is part of how Steph is slowly convincing me that I should buy one of these in an effort to build it and then giggle.
One of us.
So I get it.
Yep.
Chaz and Todd, bad influences. Got it.
Yep. Totally.
But so more seriously though, so then you decide that you want to get into this. So you buy like the Kythera kit or whatever, drop it in your gun, and it obviously worked perfectly right out the gate, right?
No. Not at all.
And of course, I was just joking around. I know that you had some struggles with it, and you had a lot of support from Todd and Chaz on the Discord as well.
Oh, yeah.
But so I just want to talk a little bit. I would like you to talk a little bit about what that process looked like for you. Because I think if people listen to this or like Pat are being swayed and saying, wow, HPA sounds great, you might not realize sort of what you're getting into out the gate.
Yeah.
Totally.
So a lot of HPA units, at least in my research, you see this little phrase there, and I'm doing air quotes for everyone who can't see it. It's drop-in kit, and that's a lie, because nothing is drop-in when it comes to airsoft. Phil, you're finding this out now with your gun. You've been going through this for a while, that you can't just drop something in and expect it to work.
Yeah.
And that's what I found with this. Luckily for me, in my research, I found that Polar Star bases all of their builds and their dimensioning off VFC guns. So that's their...
Oh, that's convenient.
Exactly. I run VFC guns. That was a big point for me as well. Is like, I've got 3 or 4 of them now. So if putting it in is going to be a little bit easier. And in my research over the years, it's like, I knew that it wasn't going to be, oh yeah, I can just take all the old guts out, throw this in here and hook the line up and away to go. No. I ran into problems that other people didn't. And it's really funny, and it really drives home the fact that airsoft is so different on that scale of things, even to batch numbers. Like, my batch gun is fit this easier than the next guy's batch. Right. And what I found was, so in the gearbox, there's 2 little pegs that hold your cylinder head kind of in place to stop it from rotating around. And when I put my unit in, those pegs were too long, and they were actually pinching the case of the Kythera. So I couldn't close the gearbox flush. And being a little meticulous like I am, I want that sealed. I want that gearbox to be closed, but I don't want it to like close so much that it deforms the case of the Kythera.
Yeah, for sure. And I know from talking to you sort of after the fact, and you really warning me before I order anything, that one of the issues that you're going to run into with these is that you basically are going to have to grind parts on the gearbox, because if you don't, it's not going to fit a gearbox perfectly. And that makes sense to me, right? Like, we're putting something inside of a gearbox that isn't what was, air quotes, meant to go in there.
Yes. Actually, this was something I picked up from Chaz, because we did a brainstorming session one night after I had finally gotten all the pieces and put it together and found that my gun wasn't working. I didn't want to modify the gearbox. I kind of came to that idea that, well, maybe one day I'm going to take this out, put all the AEG parts back in it, and sell it as an AEG. And I know in my heart of hearts that that's probably not going to happen. This is my primary gun, and unless the body like has a critical failure and falls apart on me, I'm going to use this thing until I can't use it anymore.
Right. It's shooting great.
It does shoot amazingly for the size of it. It's shooting just as well as far as Pat's gun. It's shooting just as far as Phil's gun. Like,
shooting further than my gun right now.
Well, shooting way further than yours. Yeah. But like Chaz said to me, get used to the idea that this will never be an AEG again. And in that, I'm looking at, okay, well, that means I can shave down those little posts on the cylinder head, and I can close up my gearbox. So I did, and it took me like hours, and I have a tiny little file. So you know that they don't hog off a lot of material at one go. I mean, I was literally...
That's kind of the point of them.
Yeah. An hour each side, just rubbing it down, clapping it back together. Nope, got to rub it down a bit more. Got to rub it down a bit more. So I get that section done. The Kythera doesn't have an FCU. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but it is an actual mechanical system, mechanical only, semi only. There is no full auto. So the I believe it's a closed bolt system. I'm not really 100% sure, because I was just happy enough to put it in my gun. So when I click it, when I pull the trigger, it has a small mechanism that's basically like a trigger block. So my trigger will hit it and push back on a little disconnect latch, which will drive the solenoid forward, pushing all the air pressure. Then the air pressure will go back into the system and drive that piston back to lock into place. And that's how it fires over and over and over again. So
that's really interesting.
It's a really, really, like, having taken this thing apart, like, 9-10 times, the Kythera, I mean,
Yeah.
There's 6 parts in it.
And I remember when I was using it last weekend, like one of the things that it was very, very noticeable about it is the difference in the trigger, the way that the trigger feels,
Yeah.
right? And that's, like you said, because it is mechanical, as opposed to, like, for example, on my AEG or PATS or really anyone using a Spectre, there's just a little button that your trigger is pushing, and that tells the FCU to fire the gun or recycle the gearbox, whatever,
That's
right?
right.
But with this one, it's very much more akin to and obviously, I'm not looking to draw any parallel with real steel firearms here. However, it is a mechanical sear,
Yep,
right?
it is.
And so you get a really positive sort of like click when you pull that trigger, and that's that mechanism, right?
Yes. So the way I have mindset, and I'll say this to anyone who's thinking about getting a Kythera or has a Kythera, Polar Star on their YouTube channel actually has a video called Kythera 101. It's a 25, 30-minute video, I think. It's a long video, but it's the whole gambit of what you can do with this system. They take you how to disassemble it, how to set it up, how to get your trigger weight set, how to, like I said, how to get it out of the box and get it into your gun and then get it tuned. So watch that video. I've watched it 30, 40 times, and even like watch little 10-second sections over and over again. Is like, what did he do there? What did he do there?
Mm-hmm.
But like I said before, this is not a drop-in system. This is something you're going to have to fiddle around with. My trigger mechanism, there was a post that holds the original trigger board in place for the AEGs that was in my way. That was actually like, it was rubbing on the back of the trigger mechanism, the disconnector a little bit. So I had to file that down because I wanted it to run smoothly. And like anyone who's been on the Discord or may have been privy to what I said there in one of the teching channels, that like it doesn't reset. I can fire it and it doesn't reset. So take it apart, shag it up again. Oh, well, this little part is rubbing. So I take that down, put it all back together. Nope, still not reset. Rub that down a bit more, right?
You're talking about like hours of work, right?
Oh yeah. My wife can tell you I probably put like 5 or 6 nights just sitting here at the table, putting things together, cursing and swearing, I'm only going to put in 2 screws this time and put it back together. Yeah, it's not simple. Maybe other people may have had a different experience than I did. I know most people that I've seen videos for, like the quote Airsoft YouTube celebrities. Oh yeah, it drops right in. Okay, so where's the 25 plus hours you put into making sure that thing fit and shot and made it up to your barrel? And what did you do to get it to fit? Where's that video?
Yeah, really. So you have the Kythera, and then you've also got your bolt action rifle, which is a Wolverine, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's from Wolverine Airsoft. So that's a different system again. That's a complete overhaul of the cylinder itself. The system is basically the same as an AEG closed bolt system, HPA closed bolt system, and it only takes up the space of the cylinder. There's a couple of little hoses that go down into the trigger box, and I've got a couple of extra things because I run the Wraith CO2 adapter. So I don't have this remote line sticking out of my sniper rifle.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
I've got a little tiny line. It's probably about an inch long from the body to the actual inlet. That was even more difficult again to get in place, but that was mostly because routing a battery cable through the VSR body is not easy. There's like a little small hole that's in one particular point in the grip that you got to get it through. And if you don't, well, try it again and try it again and try it again.
It's not quite designed for that.
No, it's not. I've got it to work, but it was like, I don't want to modify this because I just don't want to modify this.
So one thing I definitely wanted to note that appeals to me about the HPA setups,
yes,
that you're running, is that so I owned a gas M4 for about a season, and it was I bought the upgraded everything. I put about $1,000, $1,200 into it, and I hated that thing. Predominantly because, I definitely put your 20 hours is dead on, right? Like I put 20 hours into, installing a fully new metal bolt, into putting all the different, feeding mechanisms and stuff to make it as adjustable as possible. And just, everything that air quotes should go into it went into it. And at no point did it really work as well as an AEG, if I'm being completely honest. And partly, hey, as we were talking about, they're really inefficient. But the big problem I had with it is the same problem that I would have trying to run a propane pistol as my primary weapon, where I'm never going to drop those mags on the deck because they can break.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm sitting there holding like a $50 M4 mag going, all right, this must not hit the deck. And frankly, trying to like restrain the muscle memory where I'm usually like, yeet.
Yeah.
I totally get that. Actually, I was listening to the last podcast where you're talking about gas blowbacks having expensive mags. The one really good thing about the HPA guns, because they're AEG conversions, they use AEG mags.
That's sort of what I'm getting at. Like one of the things that I'm considering doing this with is I have a G&P long form rifle, SR25 style rifle that I have a gearbox for it, but the gearbox won't work for an AEG gearbox. There are parts of it that are just worn out where the gears interplay. But it'll work fine for putting a Kythera in, and it'd be a DMR style rifle, so semi-lock is great. And it's just sort of it feels in many ways like an ideal use for this body, albeit my initial plan had been to sort of rebuild it into what mine is and then sell it. But the fact that I can just run my mags in it, that I don't need to mess around, I can just slot my mags into it and go, is a humongous part of that appeal.
So, but this raises a good question though. Like, if someone is listening to this and going like, "Oh, well, HPA, maybe," like, why would you want an HPA gun when you can just have an AEG, right? I think you touched on some of the reasons why you, in particular, Stefan, which I think is totally legit. Like some of the things that you were like, I'm not crazy about this, but like, what is the appeal of an HPA setup, especially the setups that you have, like looking at like the Kythera in particular, but I mean maybe perhaps more broadly, why would you want an HPA when you could just use an AEG?
I think it's for me myself, a big thing that I looked at was the ability to change my FPS. So I can take my 416 compact, my 416, this little tiny gun, and if I want, I can just go to my regulator. I'm gonna crank my regulator up, test it in the chrono. Now I'm shooting DMR limits. So I can have a little shorty gun as long as I observe a minimum 50-foot engagement distance and have a pistol that's legal on our field. Now I have a DMR. If I want to rock around in the village close quarters where I know like, okay, well, standard limit is say 1.4 joules, for instance. Well, now I'm just going to take my regulator. I'm going to crank that down a little bit, test it in the chrono. Now I'm shooting like 1.3 joules. Yeah, perfect. If I want to go less than that, like if it's say an indoor environment where, you might want to shoot less than a joule. Well, as long as the pressure will reset that solenoid in the Kythera, she's good to go. I mean, operating pressures on mine, I believe, are between 60 and 120 PSI. I'm running the standard spring in my regulator. So like
120 PSI is going to be like a rail gun.
Not necessarily. Right now I'm running my regulator around 105, 110 PSI, and I'm shooting at about 1.4, 1.39, 1.42 joules in that discrepancy. So it's like 0.03 of a drop or raise in power.
So it's not as scary as I was sort of initially hypothesizing. But that's to the good, like.
And like I said, I can run that. I'm running, quote, stock springs. So with the Kythera, there's a high pressure spring. So if I wanted it to run in a DMR, say, get it up to that 1.9 or 2 joule, whatever your limit is, all I had to do is just unscrew it, pop these springs out, put it back together, put it back in the gun, done. No problem. As opposed to, well, if I'm going to do that with an AEG, I mean, in essence, it sounds like the same thing. I'm just going to pop this apart, change the spring and put it back together. But me doing it with my Kythera is going to take me 15 minutes, whereas someone who's proficient with an AEG, it might take them a half hour. By the time they get it out of the gun, they get everything apart, make sure nothing flew out of it, swap the spring, put it back together. I mean,
I feel like I'm pretty quick at it, and I think it's about a 45-minute job for me.
Well, there you go. And I mean, I'm not very proficient at it. It takes me about an hour to take a gearbox out, take it apart, put it back together, and put it back in. So like,
and are you able to work on them in a quote unquote like unclean environment? Because like one thing that we would never ever do is open a gearbox at the field, because like you said, if something flies out, you're never going to find it again.
Exactly.
Right? Are the parts in the Kythera build like big enough that you can like do it in the field, or is that still something like you want a controlled environment to work on it?
Me myself, I would want a controlled environment, just because it's like a paintball gun. If you get dirt in that thing, you're going to notice it. It's going to clog something up. Something's not going to close correctly. You're going to pop an O-ring, whatever.
And there's some small springs in there, so I feel like you're going to... Like, the biggest concern for me with cracking an airsoft gun in the field, air quotes, other than pulling the motor, which I'm completely willing to do, because they slip leads periodically, is that, like, one of those springs is going to go somewhere, and it's gone.
Just in my taking apart the Kythera, like, if I had to, and I mean I really had to, at least at Frontline, there's that little building we can go into. That's more of at least a sheltered environment. I'm not as likely to get like random dust or dirt blowing up from the ground and get in there. But I personally wouldn't do it, just because I got a couple of guns with me. So worst come to worst, I'll just swap to something else for the day.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we do have sort of that benefit, as we've talked about before, where, you know, there are usually at worst like 3 of us there. We've usually got a couple of spares. I talked relatively recently about my experience taking my gun and having it fail and being like, oh, well, I'm a potato for not bringing a spare gun. But at least, you know, we had Stefan's bag o' guns.
My micro armory.
You know, and that worked out really quite well for us.
What are some of the other sort of benefits or things that you've noticed switching to the HPA setup?
One thing actually you touched on it is my grip doesn't get hot when I shoot really fast. So
Fair.
Because as we know with an AEG, it's that motor starting and stopping. If you've got active braking on, or even just because of the nature of the system, your anti-reversal latch is just going to cause everything to slam up and it's going to stop. It's friction, it generates heat, but because I don't have that, I don't have to worry about, nothing's going to overheat here. Like we found out a couple of weeks ago when you came back from a game, Phil, like you couldn't hold on to your grip. It was that hot.
Yeah.
Like that's something that's not going to happen to me.
Although that was actually an issue. But...
Yeah, that was a severe issue. Another thing is, and it's something I noticed last week while you were using my gun and I was just kind of walking along, is how quiet it was. Like for me, because it's so close to me, I can hear that little pop, pop, pop of the gas or the air escaping the end of the barrel. But being 20, not even 20 feet back, like, wow, that's really quiet. Like if I put a little can on that, like, holy crap, you would definitely never hear it. But other than that, it's like, well, my Kythera can't do it, but I'm not a big runner of like full auto. I don't like using full auto on an AEG.
Yeah, same.
To me, it's like a waste of ammo, right? It's just, to me, I started out when I started Airsoft, I had a high cap magazine and everything was full auto all the time. And it was like, how come I'm spending so much on BBs? I don't get this. And then I realized that, there's another setting on this gun. Ooh, look at that. I ended the day with still 3/4 of a bag of BBs. Awesome.
I never shoot auto, but I still have that problem.
Yeah, I mean.
I just had a lot of fun playing with the Mark 46 that same time that we were there. And Cal has generously allowed me to go buy some parts and put them in his M249 and make it a thing. So that'll be a laugh. I'm still not opposed to the idea of polar starring it at some point in theory, but I realized that will cost me about $1,000 and went, woo!
Yeah. But, you know, I definitely hear, or I guess don't hear this, what you're talking about in terms of the volume. Shooting it, again, coming from the paintball world, I was really expecting it to be quite loud, and it is not. The system, because of the efficiency, I guess, that they've built, it only gives you as much air as you need to really shoot that BB downrange, right?
That's it. That's all it's giving you now.
Because the air is not reciprocating any of the bolt or anything like that. Like, it's just very straightforward. So that surprised me a lot, for sure.
Yeah, and even Cal was out and listening to like him shooting his Tippmann, because it does have that ratchet, that bolt to give you that realistic feel of, oh, this, like a recoil. Like I at one point heard him shoot and I was like, damn, that sounds like it's in full auto, just because of how fast he was shooting it. And then I hear like, is that Phil? Is that Phil with my gun? I see him, but I don't hear him. At that point I was, a bigger distance away. Is like I could see the gun go up and then it go down. It's like, is he actually shooting? I can't tell if he's shooting it or not.
So here's a question I don't know the answer to, that just occurred to me for this. So how often do you have to refill your tank, and how often do you have to replace it?
I'm running right now a 13 cubic inch, 3000 PSI tank. So depending on the games, if we're running like a lot of shoot heavy games, or if I'm attacking more so than defending, I'm going to go through air a lot faster. I've gotten a full day at frontline on one tank of air. And then I've also had to refill twice on one day. It all depends on how much I shoot, but I'm using, and anyone who knows the size of the tank, it's tiny. It's like my water bottle is actually bigger than my air tank. And in the future, I do want to upgrade, but I'm just testing the waters now, right? Like I'm just baby steps. I'm after spending a couple of $1,000s on this already, between the base gun and everything that I bought and put into it and whatever, right? So I don't.
Frontline can do refills on site, so I'm guessing that most paintball fields are probably going to be able to refill your HPA. Is it expensive? Cheap?
Because I'm playing there that day, it's free. But I know I have gone to the pro shop on an off day, say during the week, just because I want to do some testing with it and I need air, and it cost me like $4 to fill up my tank, which is not bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is a really great discussion. When people are looking at HPA sort of out of curiosity, I think there's a couple of takeaways that I'm sort of hearing. Number one is going to be arm yourself with patience, because even if it does say drop in, like literally it will drop in, but it might not work, right?
Yeah. Drop in it's the literal meaning of it, that yes, you can take it and drop it into your gearbox and put the shell pieces together, and yep, there she'll go.
It will certainly be there, but it will probably not work right out. I mean, it certainly might. You might. Your particular setup, I think, would be like the listener might get very lucky with your setup, and it might sort of work out of that gate. But that's not been Steph's experience, and nor Chaz's, nor Todd's, nor most people who are working on HPA.
And I think that at the end of the day, this comes back to one of the things that we repeat too much about teching, where it's just like, you're gonna need to deal with this. You're gonna need to have patience, because you're gonna have to fiddle around with tiny annoying parts. Like, one of the things that is currently in my to-do list is I bought a bull gear hop-up for the M249, and it's really, really nice by comparison to the one that's in it, but I'm gonna have to take it apart and I'm gonna have to install it, and it's not unfiddly, let's put it that way.
Yeah. So there's that, and then the other piece that I'm hearing is that you gotta arm yourself with money. Like, it is.
This is not cheap.
Yeah, like there's an investment here. So if you have the opportunity, and we say this a lot, but if you have the opportunity to try one from someone,
definitely try
then
it.
We highly recommend you do that. Like, I had a great time using Stefan's. I know for myself that is not something that I want as my primary gun. Like, I'm not really interested in having an HPA with the remote line. But I'm not saying that they're bad. I don't think that's true at all. I had a great time using it. I think they're very fun. They can be very efficient. But if I had spent $2,000 to learn that lesson, that kind of would have sucked, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're into airsoft, so we know that this is not a cheap hobby. It can be cheap if you want to run, a combat machine and 0.12 gram Canadian Tire BBs and running your track suit and a paintball mask. Like, yeah, there you go, $300 and you're done. But if you want to be like,
I think if you want to use sort of optimized gear of any sort, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be honest, like I think it's worth people remember. It's like, you know, we say like, oh well, you should really consider getting some sort of like MOSFET. So we use a BTC Spectre. Is it cheap? No, but it's some of the best parts that are available on the market.
Yeah.
And so similarly, if I look at your Kythera, it's like, is it cheap? No, but is it a really good HPA setup? Like, yeah, could it be some of the best that's on the market? I mean, I'm not an expert, but my sense would be yes, right?
It's definitely seems to be a popular setup, because there's no battery. There's no. It is once you get it tuned and put in your gun properly, it's literally plug your airline in and put your magazine in, click her on, and away she's going.
Mhm.
There's no extra. There's no now I got to make sure my battery's in, and I got okay, is my FCU set? Yeah, okay, all my settings are good. It's I mean, I kind of came into this thinking like, all right, now I'm gonna have a remote line to deal with, and how much when I transition shoulders, is this going to get in my way? Am I, at the time we were playing at Redcliffe, which is a really forested area, like, am I going to snag on something? I don't want to be running through the woods and then all of a sudden, like, well, I'm on my ass or on my back because my remote line got caught in a tree branch, you know,
Yeah,
or am I
for
going to
sure.
have to go replace a $40 or $80 remote line or something because it just snagged and popped? And I know
Yeah.
a couple of guys we played with in the past, when they had their Titmans and stuff, like one guy was playing one day and you just standing there and all of a sudden you hear this high pitched squeal and a pop and it's like, yep, remote line just popped. See you later, guys.
Yeah.
And like, I think we're to the point in Airsoft now that we're getting, or with HPA anyway, that we have better quality stuff. Like what I've got, I bought the Polar Star micro regulator and it came with a kit. So there was a length of, I think it was about 42 inches of remote line that came with it. And it's nice braided remote line. It's, you know, got that kind of slip braid on it. Nothing seems to, like, even my cat's hair that sticks to everything, it doesn't stick to it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're not buying garbage anymore, right? Like, there's definitely a point with Airsoft doing HPA stuff, and I mean this has been true of pretty much everything that's been innovated into Airsoft. There's definitely a point where most of what you could get was really not very good.
Yep.
And there's a benefit to waiting for people to work out the kinks, but like Polar Star, really for as long as I've been playing Airsoft and been aware that there are HPA rifles, they've been the brand name.
Yeah.
And the Kythera is one of their newer bits of kit, so like I'm definitely confident that the quality is there, right? Like they definitely, you know, have everything dialed in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I started playing, Polar Star had just come out with the Fusion engine, which is that gearbox drop in, and to me that is about as close as anyone is ever going to get to a drop in, air quotes, kit, because it's, you take your gearbox out, you don't even have to take your gearbox apart, you just take your old gearbox out, drop this thing in, and as long as your barrel lines up, you're good to go.
Yeah, it seems very convenient.
It is, and a lot of their what do they have now? They have the Jack, the F1, the F2, the Kythera. Like they've got 3 or 4 different setups plus the Fusion engine that all kind of do the same thing, but slightly different for whatever you're putting it in. Like when I started, it was the Fusion engine and the PR-15 and the whatever the AK one was, but it was, they had taken bodies and put the engines in and done all the legwork for you. So here's your gun, connect your line, put your magazine in, put your battery in, you're good to go. But that was I think on e-bike at the time, I'm talking like 2014, 2015, they were like $900 or $1,100 US then. But
Yeah, the
that's
price
like,
has also come down, hey?
oh yeah. The only thing that I would say is, like, if you're going to get into HPA, is know what you're getting into. Don't just go on e-bike or whatever website in your country that is your whatever and just go, yeah, I'm going to drop my money on this and I'm going to get a regulator and then I'm going to get a tank and it's going to be good to go. No, make sure you sit there and realize that if you're going to do a like what I had with the Kythera, and you want your AEG to be an AEG in 4 years' time when you get fed up with the HPA, it's not going to be. Just understand that you're going to make changes that cannot be undone.
I think definitely the fact that you have to be aware that, like, at minimum, if you want to convert back after you're going to have to go buy a new gearbox is a really useful piece of information.
Yep.
And like I said, it's not a concern for me because I'm a gun tech and I have 7 spare ones right now that I could put it into. But it's completely a legitimate piece of knowledge that I didn't have, and that I was like, oh yeah, I really, like I would not want to take an effort to convert my my primary rifle into HPA and then find out after the fact that like, oh man, I had to like carve up my $100 Lonex gearbox. That would make me sad.
Oh, I've seen guys like take literally like the back section off of their gearbox, like leave where their spring guide will sit, and they can thread their screw in for their buffer tube, but everything else is gone because they don't need it. And I know Polar Star touches on this with the Kythera. If you do have that set up with your buffer tube screw will screw into your spring guide, you have to cut your spring guide. If you use, I think Amped Airsoft makes what's called the IGL. So it's an integrated filter grip line. It's a big fancy thing that for $30 extra, most people go for it. But if you put that in, the way that the fitting is, it actually runs into the spring guide if it's full length. So you have to cut your spring guide down a fair amount. And I mean, most people are like, oh yeah, whatever, it's a spring guide, I got a plastic one in there. But for the guy that like, oh well, I got my aluminum or my stainless steel one with the little bearings on it, so my spring can torsion and whatever, you're not gonna want to cut that. You're gonna want to go through your right. And luckily enough, my system, because I run the 416C, my buffer tube doesn't run into my spring guide, so I didn't have to worry about that. But this is something that like I had this. Another thing, I don't think Polar Star has talked about it, but Wolverine Airsoft on their YouTube channel did. It's called What the Tech, and it's about fitting stuff in. So like putting your gearbox in and then finding that your nozzle of your HPA unit is off to one side in your hop up. So you're maybe riding that side. You're not, you know what I mean? So you might have to put set screws in your gearbox casing in your mech box to kind of realign it. And like, just to make sure that everything's running smooth. Cause like any little hang up, and I found that with mine, I had to shave a little bit off the inside of my hop up unit, just like with a bit of sandpaper, is that it was just rubbing just a little bit. And would it make a difference? Maybe not, but I don't want to take the chance that it's not going to reset that one time because, well, maybe there's a little plastic nub built up on it. It just rubs so much after a while that, well, now it's built up there and I got to scrape it off. I'd just rather take that time and do it now. Like, this is, again, fitment is a big thing. Make sure it fits and make sure you know what you're getting into.
So, guys, as you heard in this episode, there's a lot to getting into HPA and getting your HPA set up for Airsoft. So, firstly, thanks, Steph, for joining us today. I think this is probably the first of a few discussions we're going to have on HPA because it's a really interesting topic. But like we saw today, there's a lot to it.
It is a beast.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you're interested about HPA and you want to hop in somewhere where you can ask questions judgment free, check out our Discord. We have lots of conversations on gun tagging, not just AEGs, but all gas guns, everything. So jump into the Discord, have some conversations, ask your questions first. Lots of people there willing to help and share their knowledge. So it's as easy as possible for you when you're getting into it. That being said, that sort of wraps it up for our session today. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you do enjoy it, make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment as well. It just helps us out. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. As always, it's been great chatting with Stefan about this.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Take care, everyone.